How are you?
Good, how are you?
I wasn't blowing off that handshake. How you doing?
Good. This poor man got roasted mercilessly by the Sons of Anarchy at the last Hunt Valley show during their panel, so it's nice to have him up here for a change.
I'll never talk to those guys again. Especially Kim Coates. He's my best friend, so I will talk to him. I keep threatening I'm not going to talk to him, but I will.
Same deal as last time. If you got questions, throw your hands in the air or shout so I can see or hear you. Don't be shy. Shredder won't hurt you.
Just want to ask, iconic opening scene from The Dark Knight. You and Heath Ledger. The moment he takes the mask off, was that the first time you saw him in the makeup? Was that reaction your real first reaction?
Well, a little. It's not too loud, is it? No, just people are going to have ear damage. I'm going to have ear damage. I got the thing right here. I have to tell you, so just a little backstory on how The Dark Knight worked out for me. A good friend of mine is a good friend of Chris Nolan's, and Chris Nolan was about to start shooting the film. Mm-hmm. And he asked my buddy, he said, do you think your friend William might be interested in this cameo in the beginning of the film? And I'd never met Chris, so I talked to Chris on the phone. He sent me the scene. I read it. I called him back. I said, sure. So I get to Chicago, and it's the first 2 days of photography for the film. And the reason that Chris Nolan did that, he told me, is because I think it was the first time that a theatrical scene was shot with an IMAX camera. Because usually IMAX is, like nature things and that. Mm-hmm. So it's this big box, and so we're going to shoot this, and Chris wanted to shoot it first so he could edit it right away, and that's what he would show about the film for the next 7 months while they shot it. He would just show that one scene in the beginning. So I show up to the set to do a rehearsal, and a character guy that loves finding characters. Heath comes out. I'd never met him before, and there he is with his makeup on and everything. And I have to tell you, we just rehearsed the scene one time, and I thought to myself, what this guy's doing is so cool. I mean, as an actor, I was kind of, I was such a fan instantly before we even rolled the cameras, because I thought that he found, obviously it's what's in the movie. I mean, Heath did it throughout the entire film. I hope that answers your question. But I have to tell you, it was a real joy. Every once in a while, you work with somebody and they do something and you just look at them and you think, that's just really unbelievable. So that was The Dark Knight.
All right, thank you.
I wanted to know if you had any great funny stories from working on The Longest Yard, one of my favorite movies.
I can tell you this much. Every time we shot the football sequences, we had these monster players and these pro wrestlers. And I will tell you this much. One day after work, a bunch of the pro wrestlers, invited me to go out and have beers with them. Don't ever go out with pro wrestlers and have beer. It's just not recommended. My wife had to drive me the next day to get my car. I can tell you this, when we were shooting the football stuff and they were all in there, because listen, guys that are not in movies, especially like pro athletes and former NFL guys and the wrestlers that we had, which I have to tell you, it's hard for me to pick a favorite, but Kevin Nash, yeah, that's a whole other story. That was a separate night with red wine. But when I would go in, and I had a stunt quarterback, when I would go in, he would go in there and do the things where the guys jumped over the line and demolished them, and they did. But when I would come in, because guys, like I was saying, guys that are athletes and are not used to being in front of a camera, they get so excited. They're in a movie, they come in and they're just all jacked up. And I would literally, when they call me in for the close-up, I would walk across the defensive line and I'd go, Screen Actors Guild. Screen Actors Guild. And just remind them, this is the actor. Nobody jumping over and landing on my head. I got by. Nobody demolished me. Yes?
I don't know about Heath. Obviously, it's one of my favorites. Any good stories about working on the set opposite of De Niro, or any being with any of the other guys?
Well, what I really remember from it is that only twice, obviously when you do a play, there's a huge rehearsal period. there's really no rehearsal except on set when you go through a scene for like television, or none that I've ever experienced, and I've done quite a few series. And even in films, you know, sometimes you'll go on the set and you'll rehearse it for a half an hour or something, but only Contact and Heat were the only two films, and Heat was only my third film. That Michael Mann and Robert Zemeckis on Contact, they rehearsed for an entire week. And that's even like Robert De Niro. You got to come in and sit down and we're going to read this scene, or John Voight. And I just remember them being real gentlemen. The first 2 days of photography in like a 6-month shoot were the Van Zandt scenes in the office. So, you know, I'm a young actor and I'm all excited to be here, and it's, you know, I got De Niro on the other end of this call, and it was the first day of photography. I think we had like a 6:30 a.m. call, which means you should wrap that night on a 12-hour day. You should wrap about 7:30 at night. It's like 2 o'clock in the morning on the first night, and the crew is like, we're quitting. We can't take this anymore. Michael Mann's a perfectionist. So at about 2 in the morning, we're on the last setup of the day, and I walked over to Michael Mann and I said, Mr. Mann, and he's like, you call me Michael, and I'm like, Mr. Mann, do you want me to try anything else right now? And he's like, no, why? And I said, because, well, we're on take 27, and I was wondering if there's something you want me to try differently. He's like, no, I got it in the first couple. Let's do it again. It is what it is.
Chuck, go ahead.
How was it working with Will Ferrell and John Peter for Blades of Glory?
Well, the first time I worked with Will was on Drowning Mona. He plays Cubby, the funeral director, and I think that was one of his first films. I had a great time with him on Blades of Glory, but I will tell you this. Listen, when you're on set, even if it's a comedy or something, you know, you can't break form. You know, you got to be in the moment for the other actor. The only time that I had ever started laughing in the middle of a take was with Will Ferrell on Drowning Mona. He came out as this funeral director, and he was just like, with his Will Ferrell eyes, and I was like, I couldn't look at him. And then when they turned the camera around and the coverage was on him, I stood next to the camera, and I literally couldn't look at him. I just had to do my lines, and I couldn't look at him. It was just too funny. Some people are just funny. And that's Will Ferrell. He's just funny. Does this young lady here have a question? No, let me answer that. You're right. You're right. My 2 kids, they're very good. Thank you for asking.
I'm angry. All right. Small gathering. I suggest you all check it out. It's William, Nicolas Cage, Tom Atkins. Nice. How did the ability to play the accountant come around?
Patrick Lussier, who co-wrote it and directed the film. Patrick, who I'd never met before, I got a phone call from my agent, and he said, listen, he's interested in, you know, having a cup of coffee with you and talking about the film. So when I sat down with him, he said, listen, there's 2 roles. There's the part that's Jonah King, the crazy...
The cult leader?
Yeah, the cult leader, and the accountant. And I read the script, and then I sat down with Patrick, and I said, no, it's got to be the accountant. And we talked about it, and then he offered it to me, and that was one of the most fun that I ever had. I'll tell you one little story about that. There was have you guys seen Drive Angry? It's a really fun film. There's a scene where I'm driving like a truck, and I'm gonna drive it into these police cars. And I'm, you know, every night the night before, I'm one of these people that doesn't mind living in a hotel while I'm working on something, because it's, you know, just one head bouncing off 4 walls. I get to concentrate. And I was looking at that scene. We were shooting it the next day in the truck, and I was trying to figure out, like, you know, what's my headspace? What am I thinking about? And I had you know, a little speaker and my iTunes on shuffle, and you know, not planning it, but KC and the Sunshine comes up on my thing, and it's just you know, keep it calm, and I'm looking at the thing, and I'm like, that's it. So I called up Patrick, and I'm like, can you get the rights to that song? And he goes, yeah, I probably can't use the original, but we could use it. So the next day, I said, are you sure? And he goes, yeah. So I took my phone when we were shooting it, and I played the song inside the cab so I could get like a good like bounce rhythm to it. And then later on when he edited the film, he put that song because it just happened to come up on my iTunes. But I had a good time with it.
So great.
Perfect storm. You're wet. You're fishing on that. Like how miserable was
I
that?
think wet is an understatement. But I'm okay with that.
So what was it like going through all that? I mean, because you're acting in kind of bad conditions.
Well, a lot of people, have asked me. So, what was it like out on the water? You can't go out on the ocean and shoot something like that. You have a crew, of a bunch of people, and it's just plain dangerous. We did shoot about 2 or 3 weeks, actually 2 weeks on the Pacific and a little bit on the Atlantic. But those were only days when it was absolutely flat. You could shoot on the Pacific because just point the camera the other way and you can't see the shore and you can't see a palm tree. But the storm stuff was all in stage 16 at Warner Brothers, which is their biggest stage. I don't know if whoever might remember this, but back in I think in the 30s, they did these Esther Williams musicals, these synchronized swimming things.
Yeah.
Apparently there was a tank in stage 16 that was 90 feet by 90 feet. Hi, Linda. 90 feet by 90 feet, 26 feet deep. And they took the floorboards off, they filled the tank up, and they built a replica of the Andrea Gale, which I think the real Andrea Gale was 65 feet long. They built a replica that was 60, so it was pretty close to, and I saw it when they were building it, and it was an empty tank, and on the bottom of it, they had this thing called like a gimbal. It's basically like 8 spider arms that are all hydraulically controlled, and one guy, and then green screen all the way around, and then one guy that sat in a little booth, and he could operate that. So he could get the boat to go this way and this way. Then they put in these 100-mile-an-hour fans, they call them, and I'm not exaggerating. They look like airplane propellers. They're about as tall as the ceiling, and what they do is they had 2 or 3 of those, and they would put this, like a fire hose in front of it, and that much water, and it would hit that 100-mile-an-hour thing. And I'm like, how's that gonna make it all the way 30 feet out to the thing? Let me tell you, it felt like BBs, just bouncing off your face. Then they had these things called water cannons, which are like, at New Year's Eve when you got the little poppers. Yeah, they're like poppers with 55 gallons of water in it. So when they pull the thing, you're like, how's that gonna get all the way over here until you're sitting on your ass? And then the fun part of it all was the real joy as the storm got bigger was this thing called the dump tank. And all of us on the boat were like, how's that going to get all the way over here? Well, you'd think we would have learned by then. It was a couple of 1,000 gallons of water in a big tank, and then underneath it, it had about 10 foot wide. It was like a slide, and it had a bottom that went like this, and it was, I'm not exaggerating, from the boat, it was to that wall over there. And literally, we're all sitting on the ship going, the water's never going to make it over here. But what was fun working on the film, and we found this out, was whenever they were going to test out something, they brought all the stunt guys on. So when the stunt, because they didn't want to, listen, they could care less if Bill Fichtner got creamed, but George Clooney is not getting killed. Bill Fichtner, you can go in, Bill. Yeah, thanks, bro. So I remember the day we tested the dump tank, they brought out all the stunt guys on top of it, and they let this dump tank go. And the water comes down, they just pull the bottom out of it, and 2,000 gallons of water come down this slide, and when it hits the bottom, it literally just shoots straight across there. It hit one of the stunt guys. There was a bait table, which is actually in the movie, which is made of like 2x4s. The stunt guy hit and he broke the 2x4s. Like he went right through the 2x4s. That's how much pressure it was. And then they're like, okay, you guys can go on now. We're like, yeah. Thanks, man. It's just, I know you guys love me.
Visually impaired character?
Yes, I did.
How did you prepare for that role?
It was one of my first, I think my 4th film, and I played a couple of guys. I worked in this film called The Underneath, and then Strange Days, and heat. But when Contact came along, I was so excited because it was a whole different sort of character journey, and I was so excited about it to play that. When I found out that I got the job, the film was going to shoot over like 5 months, but I didn't start until like the 3rd month. And I lived in New York at the time, and it was such a great thing to get this job. As soon as I was hired, I literally lived in a tiny little apartment, 80th Street in Amsterdam, and I walked down to 65th Street between Central Park West and Columbus to the Jewish Guild for the Blind that I'd never been in, but I'd walked by it a million times, and it was right by my YMCA down there. And I walked in and I went to the volunteer services, and there was a guy named Rich Paddock there. And I said to him, listen, I'm doing this film. I don't start for 2 months, but I really want to get this right. I mean, I'll do anything. I'll volunteer. I'll hang around. And Rich wrote a book on cane work and all of this stuff. And I would work on that stuff, and I'd volunteer there just to observe. And then, true story, every day for 2 months, I would put these blinders on, and I'd sit in my tiny apartment, and 1 hour every day without like looking at anything. Sounds really simple. And then stand up and try to get around a little bit, and it's just like you realize all these things, but you start to get comfortable in a way. But you know what? I also found it really fed the character, because I started to feel like it was kind of lonely. You know, by the time we came to shoot it, and here's one other thing, 2 months go by, and then we're out at the Culver Studios in California, and it's a couple of days, we're in that rehearsal process of it, and the director said to me one day, hey, listen, I have these tech advisors that are here to teach you how to do this. And I remember thinking to myself, did you really think I was just going to show up and like not think about this for the last 2 months? So I had these tech advisors there, a married couple. She was blind, he was sighted, and Millicent and Gary. And I spent like a half an hour with them, and I just showed them things I was working on, and they were like, oh, you're good. So that's how we did it. Yeah.
Hi, I know I'm in the minority, but I like the Lone Ranger. How did you like that?
Let me tell you something. You are not in the minority. So, me, you, my mother, and my 4 sisters, we are in the same camp, buddy. I might tell you one story about the Lone Ranger, for those who've seen it or not seen it, but when we were going to shoot this over like a 7-month period, and we went to all the most iconic locations in the American Southwest. We're talking Canyon de Chelly and Monument Valley and Moab, Utah, and just these amazing things. Disney built their own railroad out in the middle of nowhere, 11 miles of track. They literally flew in the real trains. I mean, they wouldn't do that anymore today. All of that would be CGI, but Gore Verbinski, the director, wanted to do that. So the day I get to Albuquerque, Tommy Hopper, the stunt coordinator, picks me up and he says, hey, Bill, Tommy, how you doing? And he goes, how's your horseback riding? And I said, for about 15 minutes, 38 years ago. Yeah. And I decided right then and there, I never need to do this again. So he's like, okay, let's go to cowboy camp, like right now, instead of meeting the director. So on the way over there, he explained to me, listen, there is a stunt in the film. And Gore, he's going to tell you about it, but he doesn't want to, you can edit things and make anything look like it's connected. And he goes, but there's a stunt in the film when your character is going to chain up Tonto and the Lone Ranger, and he's going to jump out of the train. And if you watch the movie, there's not a cut. You could see the camera's on me, and I do this monologue. And while I'm talking to them, the door slides open on the train. The train's going down the tracks. And outside the train are 3 horses, and the one closest to the train has an empty saddle. And he goes, he wants you to do the stunt. He doesn't want to cut away because he wants it to be like, holy shit, did he just jump out of the train? And I'm like, holy shit, he wants me to jump out of the train. So we went once a week. For the first 2 weeks, I just stood on a flat platform and just jumped on the horse. Meanwhile, I'm trying to learn how to ride the horse. So eventually that came, but the biggest thing was getting off on that thing. After 2 weeks, we did it like 3 miles an hour. After another week, we go up to 8 miles an hour. We kept going. He said, we need to get to 18 miles an hour. 18 miles an hour is a gallop. You're going. So the day of it, right, I kept practicing it. I'm feeling pretty good. I'm landing in the saddle. There's a guy next to me, and he said his name was Thad. He was about 5'6" tall, and he was about 5'6" wide. And he said to me, get anywhere near that horse, and you will not hit the ground, Bill. I trusted him. So on the day, the train goes rolling down the tracks. Here we go. We're just about to shoot. The camera's rolling, and Johnny Depp looks at me and goes, wow, can't believe you're doing that. I'm like, not a good time to tell me that. Anyway, we shoot the scene. The door's open. I can hear the door opening. I'm trying to get this monologue right. Forget about jumping out of the train. First take, right out the door, right in the saddle. And they have a thing on film where you check the gate. You got to make sure, and because it's dusty and we're out in the prairie, sometimes you get a little tiny speck of dirt and it gets in there. You could screw up the film. It might scratch it. Mm-hmm. I've been on this film now for like 3 months, and it was the first time on anything that I was shooting where they went, oh, the gate's no good. They got a scratch on it. And I'm like, oh my God, I got it. Second take, the horse slightly slowed down, and I missed the saddle and landed right in front of it. Now, may I remind you, there is a large round thing that sits up. I missed it, thank God. Take 3. Now I got to do a take 3. Take 3. Now I got to back the whole train up again to start again. Mm-hmm. Take 3. They're like, okay, we're up to speed, 20 miles an hour, and I'm like, they told me 18. We worked on 18. Why are they up at 20? Anyway, third take, boom, in the saddle. That's the one that's in the movie. And
Wow.
listen, after a couple of weeks after that, I'm so proud of it. I'm so proud of it that there was a stills photographer that showed me a picture of me midair, and I said to him, "You have to get me a copy of that." And he goes, "Well, it's Disney's property," and I wrote a letter to Disney, and they said, "Sure, but it's only for you." And I have a little cabin, and my wife's like, "What are you going to do with that?" I'm like, well, I don't know which direction you're looking, but it's going right over the fireplace. I freaking did that. You know, I'll tell you, I have a couple of things that I've worked on that are yet to come out, but I will talk about one thing. So last November, I got a tiny little script, indie movie, small, going to shoot it in less than 3 weeks, which is the shortest amount of time I've ever worked on a feature. Probably the smallest budget I've ever worked on. But I read it around Thanksgiving last year, and I called my agent up and I said, you know what, I really don't want to do anything but this tiny little movie. And they didn't even have the money together yet. So I talked to the director and I said, just please get this together. I don't want to do anything else. January came along, it's been slow with the strike and everything. A couple of things came along and I'm like, I'm not going to do them. I'm doing this tiny movie for no money. I don't care. I want to do it. Eventually, it came together and we shot it starting on March 4th last year and wrapped it by like the 21st of March. And I have to tell you, the name of the movie is called Cut Man. And when I first read the script, the guy's just a wreck. He's an aging boxer. He's got cancer. He's an alcoholic. I stopped shaving. I stopped cutting my hair. The holidays came around and my wife was like, you're really going to keep that going on? And I'm like, yes, I am, darling. Me and my picture right there. So we shot the movie and I just saw, I saw a rough cut of it just a couple of weeks ago. And there's a lot of things, I'm not a big fan of watching myself, but I saw a rough cut. I think it's my favorite thing that I ever did. Yeah. And I hope it's a tiny film, and what happens with tiny films is a lot of times you don't have distribution, you don't have a Warner Brothers or Universal, you don't have a studio behind it. So your way to success is to take it to a festival and do well and sell it. So I know that's the plan for the film. I don't know when it's going to come out, but I can't wait.
The name one more time?
It's called Cut Man. Cut Man. I look really good with my beard.
Guys,
Not as good as your beard, but it looks good.
Thank you for coming. Give it up for William Fichtner.